The special military operation, the way Russia prefers to call its full-fledged war in Ukraine, was launched on 24th February 2022. Then it had always meant to be a mission of the Russian military. But somewhere along the way, attention shifted to two individuals: Ramzan Kadyrov, head of the Chechen Republic, who fights for Russia with his army Kadyrov, and Yevgeny Prigozhin, the chief of Russia's private military company, the PMC Wagner, who is all the time in news for his rather dramatic declarations and announcements on the friction with the official Russian generals. And to everyone's surprise, Kremlin lets that happen. The rise of these two Vladimir Putin loyalists with direct access to the Russian president isn't favored by the mainstream military elite, who understandably wish to be seen as the sole legitimate Russian force. What I just told you above has been happening for quite a few months, and this has led to a peculiar situation now. Ideally, loyalty to the cause should be the binding glue for different combatants. But the three main combatant groups in Russia's war in Ukraine are actually competing for superiority and legitimacy by highlighting the other's weaknesses and ineptitude. And in that process, Russia's military, logistical, and operational shortcomings have been highlighted time and again. First by Kadyrov, and lately and more consistently by Prigozhin. To add to this rather complex maze, more private armies are getting launched in Russia by the day. In February 2023, Ukrainian intelligence reported on the proliferation of mercenary companies modeled after the Wagner Group that was then dismissed as propaganda. But the latest to join the bandwagon is Potok, a private army established by none other but the energy giant Gazprom. Does it indicate that the oligarchs sense an ensuing disorder in Russian society and are preparing in time to protect their investments? It could be a possibility indeed. But first, why isn't the special military operation a solely Russian military undertaking anymore? Why did they start needing the mercenaries in the first place? In the first phase of the Russia-Ukraine war, enthusiasm about taking on Kyiv ran high among Moscow's military establishment that planned a 3 to 5 day attack on Ukraine, confident that it would win. That was also a time when news of the special military operation was institutionalized by Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and his department. Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov seemed to be in charge of the official narrative. That was Russia's one and only Plan A. But then it failed. So, as plans to take on Kyiv backfired and the Russian offensive stalled, especially after August 2022, Ramzan Kadyrov started expressing discontent with the state of affairs on social media, especially on TikTok. Months after projecting Russia's war in Ukraine as jihad for the Chechen fighters, he started to openly criticize the Russian army for setbacks in Ukraine. So much so that his disapproval of then commander of the Central Military District, Alexander Lapin, led to the latter's replacement in February 2023. Now, this is quite something. Kadyrov's views were followed and supported by Prigozhin, an ex-convict and a business tycoon who until recently controlled the Wagner Group from behind the scenes. If you go through the references for my piece, you will get to read a lot more about the rise of Prigozhin, his wealth, and his clout. The details are provided in the description box. Take a look. Now, coming back, for the record, Wagner aided the Russian military for the first time during the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Further, Prigozhin's global and domestic profile got significantly enhanced following his army's successes in other parts of the world as well, but he kept denying any formal links with it. It was only in September 2022 that he stepped out from the shadows as the PMC Wagner leader and openly pledged to help Putin's cause in taking down Ukrainian forces. And he did it in style. In a dramatic self launch, he first filmed himself recruiting Russian prison convicts for the PMC Wagner and then started claiming that the gains made by Russians in Bakhmut were to be attributed to the mercenary group and not to the army. He also issued a blunt statement bragging about openly interfering in November 2022 US midterm elections. Let me tell you more about the grey zone of shadow operations uniting the Wagner and the Russian army. Prigozhin's rise takes us back to addressing a rather fundamental question. What is the role of private armies, also called the private military companies, in Russia? So, the PMCs are illegal entities under constitutional law in the country. In fact, Chapter 3, Article 71 of the Russian Constitution reserves all matters related to defense, security, foreign policy solely under the purview of the Russian state. Over the years, there have been repeated proposals in the State Duma, the lower chamber of the Federal Assembly, to legalize these PMCs, but they have not been met with any tangible success. And that also has a reason. Closer scrutiny reveals that the utility of the PMCs remains high as long as they are extra legal. It is their grey zone status and operating power in the shadows that enable them to carry out missions no legally constituted armed force in the world would do, least of all that of Russia's, supposedly the second most powerful military in the world. So, as an undefined shadow instrument of state policy, these private armies operate as the flexible and convenient deputies of mainstream statecraft, adapting to complex international security situations. For instance, these armies come in handy where formal Russian interference or involvement could perpetuate a diplomatic row or a regional security crisis. They also act as arms traders, political consultants, and different types of force multipliers. Since these private armies are mostly carrying out orders in lieu of economic benefits, it explains their staggering rise through lush business opportunities in Russia as well as through diplomatic channels outside the country. And even after such economic benefits, the self funding private armies remain a low cost option for the Kremlin to assert its influence in key foreign engagements. Russia's diplomatic support to Putin's chef Prigozhin was evident when PMC Wagner was able to expand its economic footprint in the Central African Republic after 2017. In turn, the mercenary group helped deepen Russian influence in the region. The Wagner phenomena over North and Central Africa has been duly recognized by the European Union as well. The European Peace Facility, the EPF, has decided to militarily equip and train the armies of these affected countries to fight the Wagner menace. Therefore, low maintenance PMCs have been successfully operating as a potent toolkit of Russian policy, particularly in North and Central Africa. What makes these PMCs more attractive for the Kremlin is the space to maneuver deniability. Any responsibility that the Kremlin wishes to evade could be ascribed to the PMCs, eventually evaporating in the cloud of their extra legal status. However, these armed groupings also perform an important domestic function known as parallelism. This is when authoritarian regimes coup-proof the state to neutralize coup attempts by regular military lest it turns against the autocrat in times of crisis. Literature on parallelism describes how, for instance, Adolf Hitler maintained an alternate array of loyal armed institutions as a double check to protect himself in crisis situations. Now, of course, notwithstanding the differences, in principle, the domestic function of PMC Wagner is quite similar. What does it tell about the cracks within the Russian military? Since there has been a shift of power away from the official security and defense institutions in Russia, it could mean that both Kadyrov and Prigozhin are eyeing more central positions. After all, why are they still retained and appeased after literally using expletives for the Russian generals? Kadyrov emerged as the original critic of the Shoigu Gerasimov bloc after he posted an 11-minute long video criticizing the military's underperformance in Izium. It was one of the battles. Prigozhin, too, has grabbed attention by taking repeated jibes on Russian military capabilities on his Telegram channel. Now, amid all this noise, for themselves, both men have tried to build a reputation of Russia's true patriots and Putin's true loyalists with direct access to him. That Putin has still not silenced them at this sensitive time is indication enough that their voices are directly heard at the top. This undeniably reflects their larger political aspirations as well. Kadyrov, for instance, has gone on record expressing frustration at being relegated to the margins for years as the leader of the Chechen Republic. In a public display of his loyalty, he actually vowed to send his 3 sons to fight for Russia in Ukraine. That said, Kadyrov's ethnic roots as a Chechen limit his pan Russia appeal. But Prigozhin, meanwhile, has been posturing himself as the next fearless conservative leader. He proudly talks about interfering in the US electoral process despite being sanctioned both by the US and the EU for war crimes in Syria and other regions of Africa. This actually also shows how little such sanctions matter on the ground. So, only time can confirm the veracity of these conjectures. But what may be safely argued is that the increasing visibility and prominence of Prigozhin and Kadyrov indicates the weakness of the formal state apparatus within Russia. There is an uncanny similarity between Prigozhin and Kadyrov, hardliners such as the army veteran Igor Girkin, and ultranationalists such as Alexander Dugin. All of them have been attacking the Russian elite and accusing it of appropriating state resources for personal gains. In their common opinion, wars such as Russia's in Ukraine have exposed disloyalty and the decay within. These personalities, though, project themselves as the fixers of the situation, but actually land up competing for legitimacy. What does it mean for the future of the Ukraine war, which is currently pegged on a tense hook, after an alleged assassination attempt at Putin has triggered Russian fury? To call the special military operation a war is a criminal offense in Russia, and information about it remains tightly guarded in the country. It is indeed ironic that Putin loyalists have been openly releasing videos on the lack of ammunition, problems with Russia's logistics, and poor preparation for Ukraine's upcoming counteroffensive. To a distant observer, the line between Russia's internal friends and foes looks rather blurred. Finally, it is all an indication that things will get a lot worse before they get a little better. Tell me what you think of today's video. I'll be back to discuss the war and other pressing issues of today's geopolitics. Stay tuned.